Welcome to Mental Health Mondays with Mrs. Thompson. Today's topic is anxiety. Now, Ms. Thompson, how about you introduce yourself?
I am Mrs. Thompson, and I teach our psychology classes here. I also teach English. I teach our Ferris English classes, but I teach behavioral science, which is an introduction to psychology, and then I also teach our AP psychology class.
So you're very well versed in this topic.
Yes and no. I will say I teach about anxiety and depression and all kinds of mental health issues all the time, but I am certainly not a therapist or a counselor, so I always encourage people to see our mental health professionals in the office if they have any further questions. I'm always happy to start discussions about mental health, but definitely if you feel like you're struggling with mental health, I would encourage you to see our professionals. We have some great professionals in the office.
Yeah, and also taking your classes, I know that you always say, take things with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Just to avoid, the Google search of self-diagnosis.
Oh, don't do that. Yeah, don't hop on Google and look up your symptoms. That's a really bad road to travel down. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of symptoms, what are symptoms of anxiety?
Symptoms of anxiety can be different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So some people might just walk around with a feeling of dread that they can't figure out. There's nervousness. There's, that sympathetic nervous system is all worked up. You've got adrenaline going. You can't quite figure out why. You're trying to figure out that next thing you have to worry about. And it's kind of a free-floating worry. And then for other people, it's very specific. They're focused on the thought that they can't get out of their head. They're worried about a test, or they're worried about a relationship or something like that. And again, we don't always recognize those feelings as anxiety because it does surface differently for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And what are the different kinds of anxieties?
There are a lot of different disorders that involve anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety can coexist with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So anxiety can coexist with depression, for example. Those things very commonly happen together. Anxiety can exist with something like OCD, which is very anxiety-based. It's its own category of disorders, but there's still a lot of anxiety involved. Anxiety can surface with phobias. There's something called generalized anxiety disorder that's just that free-floating worry that lasts for a long period of time. You can't quite figure out what it is exactly you're worried about, but you just got to find that next thing to cling on to. So again, so many different types of anxiety and different disorders that involve anxiety. I do want to clarify, though, you don't have to have a disorder to have anxiety. People can have acute anxiety where maybe you're just having a rough week. People can have chronic anxiety where, now it's something that's becoming a little more distressing and taking over your life. And so there's a whole spectrum of anxiety. Someone could say, oh, I'm anxious about a test today, and that's okay. Or someone could say, oh, I just feel like I'm just anxious and I can't figure out why I'm anxious. And I always encourage people to talk to someone else if they're feeling that way, try to figure out where those feelings are coming from.
And that leads me to my next question is, what is the most common misconceptions or stigmas about anxiety?
I think one of the most common misconceptions is that people have to go on medication. And I think that keeps people from getting help sometimes because they think, oh, I'm going to have to engage in years of therapy and take tons of medication. And that's not always the case. I mean, everyone handles anxiety very differently. It's very relative to what's going on in that person's life and how we as individuals handle stress. Everyone handles stress differently. Everyone handles trauma differently. So I think that one of the misconceptions, like I said, is about medication. Another is that it's the same for everybody. I think people like to think there's one definition of anxiety when really, again, there's a spectrum and everybody's going to handle it a little differently. And I think we just need to respect that a little bit, because I think people are quick to judge others who use the word anxiety. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. We definitely run into that, conversations at school where people will say that they're anxious about something and then somebody else is like, well, you can't say that because you don't have anxiety. They get very territorial over certain mental health things. So, I've heard of that before for sure.
That's unfortunate because people should be able to use the word anxiety, and it doesn't necessarily mean a disorder. It can hit that level, and that's when people need to definitely recognize their own feelings and talk to somebody about it. But there's so many different types of anxiety.
And what are the school resources that we have to help with that?
We have a great staff in the guidance office. Definitely, you guys always hear the phrase yellow slip, but I always encourage people, if you have any kind of concerns about how you're feeling, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you can't figure out how you're feeling, but you know it's not how you normally feel, fill out a yellow slip. That's probably the best resource we have right now. You know, I mean, our staff is pretty approachable, pretty amazing, and they will, of course, direct you to the right place too. But you know, it's a starting point. Sometimes it's best to just start with any adult, parent, staff member, somebody you trust, to then take you to that next step of maybe getting further help.
I definitely think that's great. Just to have like a resource that's close by and that you can rely on for sure is very helpful for people.
You know, when we talk about mental health, there's such a spectrum, you know, so I think if we could just recognize that sometimes we just need help figuring things out. We just need to talk to someone for a while. We don't necessarily have to go through years of therapy and bottles of medication. Sometimes it's just a matter of doing what you need to do for yourself and talking to somebody about it.
Is there anything else you would like people to know about anxiety?
I guess what I want people to know is that it's more prevalent, I think, than maybe we sometimes recognize. And anxiety levels are a little higher now because we've been dealing with a lot over the last couple of years, everything from pandemic to politics. Social media is a big trigger of anxiety, you know, so I always encourage people, whether it's my own kids at home, my kids here at school, to try to get off the phone for a little while. You know, when we're constantly bombarded with things, it causes anxiety we don't even necessarily recognize. So just taking that mental health break, stilling your mind, and being by yourself can really help not trigger anxiety.
And then that leads me to my last question is there any helpful advice you have for ways to reduce anxiety?
Definitely, like I said, getting off the screens for a little while, talking to someone that you trust, someone who's not going to judge if you use the word anxiety. You know, and there are other things people can do too, like breathing exercises or different exercises with imagery, mental imagery, refocusing your mind. There's so many different things that you can do. Just listen to some music, do some art, go for a run, you know. Exercise is a big one, you know. Diet. I could talk about this forever, right? Like making sure you're putting some good things into your body. There are a lot of things you can do. And if you ever have questions about any of that, definitely talk to an expert and they can help steer you in the right direction.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
That was Ms. Thompson with Mental Health Mondays, and next topic will be depression. Have a great day, Spartans.